everybody. I'm not a morning person, so I just have to, be transparent about this. But I'm really excited about this conversation that we're going to have today. We have an incredible group of panelists that are extremely multifaceted, and I can say we're going to try to stay on time too. So we may not be able to cover everything, but I do just, highly encourage all of you after this panel session to have a conversation with each one of these people. It's very helpful. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have first up David Goldstein. He's the Chief Operating Officer at U Sports Toronto. And so the way he described this is the NCAA version, but in Canada. So this is exciting to have this conversation with them. Next up, we have Darrin Gray. And Darrin Gray is the Chief Marketing Officer for Athletes in Action. Welcome, Darrin. Next up, we have Vernell Hooker.
Whoever is speaking.
She is the founder of IOU Sports and the owner of the Milwaukee Aces.
The volume becomes a problem.
We have Eric Shaynock. He's the co-founder of Philanthropy Playmakers. So now we're going to come join us.
Let's follow her. Okay. Check the volume.
All right, can y'all hear me? Wonderful. All right, so we have many things that we want to talk about, but I just want to start this conversation by just introducing a little bit about myself and the organization that I'm here representing. And so I'm with a global organization, Laureus Sport for Good, and we provide $40 million in over 140 countries to bring positive impact through social change. And so we are here at a sports philanthropy conference. And so I really want to take a deep dive into the role of all of these different organizations when it comes to investment in our community. And when it comes to investment in our community, when we're talking about collaboration and agenda setting. So we're going to start there. And I'm going to ask the first question for all of you. And just really, what is your role when we think about collaboration and when we think about the true essence of sports philanthropy and investing back into our community? How do you see yourself building out your agenda, and how do you see yourself collaborating with different stakeholders in the community?
I can go ahead and start. So at Philanthropy Playmakers, we originally started with the intention of being a connector in the space and telling the positive stories that were happening in sport, whether that was brand, athletes, nonprofits, because at the end of the day, we thought that was an undertold story. And so as we've continued to make inroads there and help connect the dots between organizations and athletes that are using sport as a vehicle for social impact, we realized that there's a lot of people that want to do good, but they're not sure what to do or how to do it. And so first and foremost, your organizational agenda is arguably the most important thing. Whether you're an athlete, an organization, it doesn't matter, right? It's your North Star. And so you need to make sure that when you set your strategy, you're working towards your objectives. And your goals can be lofty, right? In a previous life, I was a fundraiser, and we would say we want to end childhood cancer. Well, that's a really lofty goal. And so what are the actual steps and strategy that you're going to take so that you can achieve those goals? Because it's not enough to just state it, but then you need to work day in and day out, making sure that you ladder back to your organizational strategy. So I'd say that first and foremost is what you need to do as an organization, is plan that strategy and then be able to create actionable steps to achieve those goals.
Thank you.
Can we ask questions or no?
We'll have time for a Q&A at the end.
Gotcha.
We'll have about 10, 15 minutes.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Vernell Hooker. I am not like everybody else on this panel. So my father dared me to get into this business, which is a nonprofit business. I coached collegiately for 25 years. I'm a criminal justice major. So when I started this organization, Images of Our Sports, IOU Sports, I started because there was no training for young girls in the community when I was looking for athletes for Division III programs. The level of play was not there. So I kept bugging my father in between the basketball games and baseball games. He said, get out there and make something happen. So Aidoo Sports is 16 years old right now. I put the C in collaborations because Aidoo Sports go into other organizations to enhance their girls' programming or to bring programming into organizations who doesn't have it. So we create these type of programs for other organizations, and that's how we bring in the philanthropy part of it. We're not charging these organizations anything to do that. We want more girls to go into organizations, to be active, to be in other communities and do things other than stay at home. So I'm a little different from everybody else. But also the key is to give back to the community. And for young girls, and as well as young women, there's not a lot of organizations out there for them. We can talk Boys and Girls Club, we can talk Girl Scouts, but it stops at a certain point. So what we do, we teach girls the business of sports. We let them know what it is, what it's like to be behind the scenes. And that's why I brought in the Milwaukee Aces program as basketball for women who graduate to continue playing, but also let the young girls in the community see these young women active as well.
So I think that that's really important because I think both of you raised really great topics in terms of talking about fundraising and talking about programmatic work that's happening on the ground. And so when we think about collaboration, we all have our various different types of roles. And so I'd be curious to know, in terms of investment, I know that we have, and I'm probably gonna direct this question to you, David. We talked a little bit about how, youth sports is investing in the community. And so I'm curious to know from a lens of an organization such as that, such as like the NCAA, how do you think about your investment in the community? What does philanthropic endeavors look like for you?
Sure. So we're a unique organization. So we're a unique organization. We are essentially the Canadian equivalent of the NCAA. So we oversee university sports across Canada. And we had the challenge, we had an expiring strategic plan that was done by previous leadership, so we kind of inherited it. And it had a lot of general statements that were tough to kind of pinpoint. When we talk about strategy, for me it's really, everyone who works in sports has a million great ideas. The question is, we're limited in resources, financial, human, otherwise. So to me the strategic plan is, how do we decide what to focus on, what to prioritize when we come to that fork in the road, which decision to make, and philanthropy and collaboration is a big part of it. So we oversee university sports across Canada, but we don't own that student-athlete experience. For us, we looked at ultimately what do we do, and we provide student-athletes with exceptional opportunities, and the hope is that those opportunities enable them to unlock their full potential. But we can't do that by ourselves. So if you take, for example, I'll give a name, Kylie Mass is a Canadian Olympic swimmer. She also swims at the University of Toronto, which means that U Sports has a vested interest in her experience. So does Swimming Canada, the National Federation. So does the Canadian Olympic Committee. So does the Coaches Association that wants to make sure she gets the best coaching. So does the Canadian Association for the Advancement of Women in Sport. We collaborate with all of these organizations because they are all a part of what we fundamentally do, which is provide exceptional opportunities for student athletes. We can't do it ourselves, but it helps us when we come to a strategy to find what is it that we're doing, we're providing opportunities, and so that's why we collaborate with all those different groups, because we can provide a great national championship, but if we are excluding students from opportunities, so we just passed a transgender policy for the first time, because there were a group of students at universities who weren't eligible to compete under our current rules. And that is fundamentally contrary to our vision and mission. So that's really philanthropy to us. We don't necessarily provide grants to grassroots organizations. That's not our role. But we do collaborate with all sorts of different groups, and we fundamentally want to provide those exceptional opportunities.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important, that when we think about philanthropy, it's a broader scope than just looking at the dollars that we invest. And so I think it's about how do we, as game changers in our spaces, how do we leverage, our power and change systems? So I hear you talking a little bit about, gender inequality and thinking about their policies there. And so I'm just curious from all of the panels. So when we think about our mission, vision, and values, and so Darrin, I know that you're an Athletes in Action, so I'm just curious to hear a little bit more. How do you drive in the mission, vision, and values, serve, and to create your agenda, but also when you're externally communicating, how does that play a factor?
Yeah, well, in sports philanthropy, if you want to go fast, go alone. You want to go far, go together. Right? We're in this for collaborative purposes. So in my body of work, which happens to be sports media ministry, trifecta, all three working together, I know exactly who my collaborators need to be. Fellowship of Christian Athletes, Professional Athlete Outreach, many of the other groups that have the same agenda that I have to see Jesus followers on teams. Okay? So the metrics, which we're judged by, are we leading and moving toward that global agenda as an international sports organizing body that both sends out teams and receives teams at our 220-acre campus in Ohio, not far from Dayton. And so we all want the same, right? We want really high character leaders, men and women that are coaches. That's what we call them in our culture. We call them coaches. We want to make sure that they understand academic, athletic, social, and spiritual dimensions of training so that they can train up the kids on the load, explode, drive, speed, strength, agility, all that stuff that I know about in an NFL context and that you know about in basketball or whatever your chosen sport are. But we're all working toward the same end, which is to make sure that kids have an opportunity to succeed by having great, caring, role model adults in their lives. So I just want to encourage this group, right? How do we collaborate? How do we find common ground, whether or not our goal and objective is to find more investors, to find more donors, to find more supporters. Probably that's the thing that unites all of us. We all want more capital to do what God is calling us to do in our spheres of influence. But if we do that together, our chance of success will be greater. So great props for Roy and his ability to draw people together on such a short notice. I think a round of applause is in order. Because my closing thought here on collaboration, because without these sort of global leaders drawing us together, we'd all be in our own domain of expertise today, and we would be doing it alone. I mean, collaborating a little, but we can collaborate a lot today because of that guy in the back room.
Wonderful. You look like you.
Yeah, so to your point on mission and vision, right? You sit and look around in this room here, and we have some of the best missions in the world sitting in this room. And it's not a corporate mission, right? We're literally trying to change the world. And so I heard this last night and loved it. It's your MVP, right? Your mission, your vision, and your passion, or in what I'll say, your purpose. So what is that for your organization? How are you going to communicate that internally and externally to your staff, to your leaders, to your board? Because at the end of the day, you need to be able to explicitly say that in 30 seconds or less so that someone understands what you're doing. And it's incredibly important because if you didn't exist, what would the community be lacking, right? Like that's the existential question of your mission is, if I didn't exist, would this still continue? And you need to be able to fill that white space. And that's why you see many corporations and Fortune 500 companies trying to jump on that purpose space because they know that their mission is to make money. And their purpose, so that's their lasting legacy. And so that's one of the hottest topics across the board because they know that future generations, right, millennials, all of these people are looking to do business with, give their money, give their time to an organization that aligns with their inner mission. And so I think that's critically important. If not, once you have your strategy it's arguably the most important piece of the pie.
Yeah, and I think that that's really important when we talk about external communication. And also, as we're building this agenda, one of the conversations that we were having before we actually set up here was just how do we authentically communicate what the message is internally and externally. But also at the same time, there were conversations around this evidence-based approach, which is very typically scientific in a way. But then you also have to look at the community-based approach. And so when I think about the work that we do at Laureus, we just went through an intensive strategic plan at the end of 2018. And so one of the things is just how do we marry and think about this collaborative approach. So we have not only funders, nonprofit organizations, professional athletes, teams, all in one space, but how do we, one, understand the roles of each one of those individuals and communicate what the goal, the mission, vision, value, or the MVP that you're saying. And so I guess, the question is how do you authentically communicate to the community and also internally, because that's really important to make sure everyone's on the same page of what is the goal, and then also as you think about assessing what that is, and this is like a twofold question, but as you assess what that is, there are evidence-based and there are community-based models that you want to use to inform your work and evaluate your work. So.
Sure, I think, informing and evaluating, obviously two separate things. And I think I view analytics or data or evidence, information that you collect the way I probably think a team picking players should, which is it's really helpful and it can't be relied on exclusively and blindly. You need to scrutinize it. So I'll give you an example for us. When I joined 3 years ago, all of our schools' rosters were all submitted by PDF or by fax, which meant that we didn't collect and aggregate any data, which meant that everything was anecdotal. So when we made rules about transfer restrictions, when I joined, the organization had age caps in certain sports without knowing the average age of a student athlete. So all these rules were being made, or citizenship caps, that you needed a certain percentage of Canadian citizens if there was a feeling there were too many foreign players taking spots in a given sport, but we didn't know how many citizens were in that sport. So it was all anecdotal driven, and it was all driven by essentially which is the coach that had the loudest voice on that conference call and was most upset about losing to a team with an older player the previous year. That's nonsense. I mean, you can't run a business that way. You need to understand. So we brought everything online. It took a couple of years. We now know exactly the average age by gender, by sport, all of that, which means you can make an informed decision. And we found out a lot of things, like we spent years working on transfer rules when not that many kids transferred in our system. So it was wasted time or inefficient time. So that's an example where the data really helps. There's also data you take with a grain of salt. We survey our student athletes after every national championship to see, again, we provide these great opportunities, let's see how well we did. And what we found over the last couple of years is invariably, no matter where the championship was held, how it was organized, the team that won had a great experience at the hotel. They loved the food. They thought the hospitality was fantastic. The guest speaker at the banquet was brilliant. And the teams that lost in the quarterfinals hated everything. And it doesn't really help inform that next decision on the hotel. You can only tell so much. And even our member schools, we do an annual meeting every year, 4 days. And one year we did our annual meeting and people filled out the post-event survey, and a bunch of them complained there weren't enough healthy snacks at the breaks. It was all unhealthy snacks. So the next year we made healthy snacks, and literally the doors swung open for the first break. I'm walking out and the very first thing I hear is, damn it, healthy snacks, come on guys. I thought, all right, again, grain of salt, but I think for big decisions, for things that can be collected, it's just really helpful, again, as part of your decision-making process.
So I'll riff with him for a moment by asking the question, how many of you have gotten to play for a team where there was a culture of caring, where there was love at the center of a team? I'm serious. Like, how many of you played on a team where you knew that you were playing for the man or the woman on your right or your left, you were playing for the community, you were playing for something bigger than yourselves? And for those of you that haven't, there's nothing more invigorating, right? Win or lose. But the funny thing is, most of the time, those are the winning teams. And so we study this very closely with very clear metrics. In fact, there's a man here in the room, Patrick Fisher, that's built a system called character measures that can literally go inside and measure and correlate how character leads to higher levels of performance and culture building. And when you get a culture of caring on side of a team, man, amazing things can happen, win or lose. And quite frankly, we believe that character decisions are often the most important thing. I learned a lot of this from one of my mentors, retired NFL head coach Tony Dungy, who built a career at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and then the Indianapolis Colts. I know I'm in Chicago, so I need to be careful because we found a way to take it to you in the Super Bowl, which was not actually the Super Bowl, which actually was the week before when we played the New England Patriots and got our pathway there. But anyway, y'all had a fantastic team. We love Lovie Smith. You know that Lovie and Tony are dear friends, so great respect for my Chicago Bear fans. Chris Draft here in the back of the room. So to finish that thought, high character teams matter. Let's measure these things that really matter. Let's take it beyond anecdotal learning and understanding and figure out how to put high character coaches on teams that ultimately lead to higher levels of performance that will lead us and the children to what it is they're looking for in the first place, which is to play for teams where we move from success to significance.
So I want to continue this conversation because I know we have, Burnell and Eric here. You've done a lot of research and you've written a lot around the philanthropic space, and then I know you're doing on-the-ground direct service work. And so when I think about the work of Laureus, and when we look at, when we do our research and evaluation, when we inform our work, there are two things that come to mind. I think about, a pay-to-play model and just thinking about access for our young people and what does that look like? How is it changing the culture of sport? And so it's interesting to hear how you guys are informing and evaluating your work on that competitive side. But I'm also very curious to know from both of you and just the information that you gathered, there's a huge gap when we talk about women and girls. And so I know that there's something that you've talked a lot about that. And so I'm curious to hear a little bit more from you and the shift in Milwaukee from an evidence-based approach to a more community-based approach and how that impacts your work. And so I want to start there and then we can launch a little bit more into your thoughts there.
Thank you, because it does impact our work. When we go in and we go to other organizations, we look and see how many girls are actually participating in sports activity. It's usually 2 or 3. Because they're sitting around the gym watching the boys play. So how you get them involved and get them active in different ways, and I tell them you have to separate them. And I know a lot of people don't like the idea we have to separate the boys and girls, but it's important to separate these girls because at this point their confidence is down. They're thinking about how they look. So you got to build their confidence up to be able to say, I want to go play with the boys today. So that's very important. And when we found that out, we started capturing the number of girls, or how many are returning, how many did we lose. So we keep that in mind, and we also ask the girls, so what do you want to do? And what do you like? So adding that on and giving these young girls a voice allows us to create those sports opportunities for them, so they can get involved, so they can play with the boys. And because you play with the boys, you're gonna get better. Anybody knows that, right? I don't care what sport it is. You play with the boys, you're gonna get better. So as a girl, we try to give them that confidence to say it's okay to play with the boys. It's okay to get roughed up a little bit because in any sport, this is what's gonna happen. So talking to the youth, asking them what they want, and get them girls to get confidence up allows us to capture those numbers. It lets us know if those organization numbers have increased for the girls. Are our programs working? That girls are hearing, they're doing some things that I like to do. And that's the point, and that has happened. We've seen an increase in organization sports activities. And I want to add another thing too. Milwaukee just started an organization, Milwaukee Youth Sports Alliance. So you guys capture that because this is going to be huge. It's going to allow organizations in the city and also Milwaukee County to come together and collaborate together and do events together. So that we can do and work with more youth in a collaborative manner. So we're excited about that. And then in talking about girls, have that in your conversations. Nothing wrong saying we need to talk about girls, we need to talk about women, we need to get them involved. Because we kind of leave the girls out. It's time to get the girls in the conversation. in what we do.
So, one quick thing just to piggyback off of that, I think that issue of youth sports, it goes beyond just the nonprofit space. You look at Nike, that's one of their signature programs, is they're made to play to get 16.5 million kids active across the world. And they have the research that shows that female, young women drop out at twice the rate that males do. So I think it's something that they're working with their nonprofit organizations. When we go back to collaboration, they're seeing what's being done from that community-based approach. They know that you've got to go to your constituents and your stakeholders and say, hey, you know this better than anyone else. There's people in the room that work directly with athletes. So go directly to them and say, hey, what are you seeing on the ground floor, so that we can make more informed decisions when we're either trying to create programs or give out money. The other question that you originally asked as well is, how do you market it internally and externally? And you can do really good work, and if you don't have the right approach, and it's an art and a science, right? But if you don't have the right approach, you're going to miss out on something there. And so, when in a previous life I was at St. Jude, and they do both the evidence and the community-based research. And they're a great organization, and I'm biased, but I don't want to bore you with the scientific aspect of that. They realized that to reach a mass appeal, they need to have 3 to 5 key talking points that they can then take across the board. So they say, no child pays for anything. We won't stop until there's no child left with cancer. They've got their 3 to 5. I'm a little rusty, obviously. I've been out of that space, but they have 3 to 5 really key talking points that their patients talk about on events, the patient families talk about. You see it on TV, you see it in social media, digitally, and print. And so you look at the way they message everything externally, and they're going to have the same message at every single touch point. And I think one of the biggest issues that I'll see is that I'll go to your website and see that you have 3 programs, and then in your annual report, there's 5 programs. And then when I talk to you, there's 2 new programs. Well, are these the same ones? Are these messaged in a different manner? I think if you can be consistent and authentic at every single area, whether you're talking in person, online, at events, you're going to be able to capture someone's attention, and they're going to get it. So I think sometimes simpler is better in that sense, because from a mass appeal and from a donor perspective, they're giving because they trust in what you're doing as an organization, and they know that you do good work. So you need to make sure that you can have that resonate with potential donors, current donors, and just prospective people in the community. So I think that's just a really important piece, because you've got to be able to tie it both internally and externally, and then communicate that from a top-down approach so that your leaders truly believe in it. Because if your leaders and your team don't believe in it, there's no way you can message that externally.
Thank you for that. So I'm trying to do a pulse check and understand who is all in the room. So out of curiosity, how many of you are actually direct serving organizations in here? Sir, nonprofit organizations. Okay, that's a good chunk of you. How many of you are in philanthropy? Okay. What about working for sports teams or leagues? All right. Maybe someone who does like consulting work and works with, all these different entities and are trying to tie together. All right, so I feel like that's probably majority of the room right there. And so I was trying to do a pulse check because I'm really trying to connect all of these different strategies, because this is a very diverse group up here and they're all very multifaceted. And so I don't know that we really touched on like the specific approaches that we've taken to actually build the agenda, but then these specific approaches that we've taken to also collaborate with people. And so I'm saying this to say, because when I think about the work that we're doing in collective impact, and so I'm not sure if that's a familiar term with all of you, but collective impact work is really hard, and it talks about a variety of things. It talks about the different stakeholders who are sitting at the table, and we make sure that it's a commitment that empowers the community to do the work. It also thinks about equity, and so I know that's a little bit of what we're talking about in terms of gender representation, access and things like that. Everything is included. So I'm just really curious to hear, and you look like you have something to say, Darrin, so I'll let you go ahead and talk.
Well, I do, because in some ways it is hard, but identify a problem, meet a need, right? Dads are absent from America's school system. They don't know where they fit. They're not welcome at the PTO. I don't have any PTOers here. They don't feel comfortable at PTA. They don't know what to do, especially when you get in high school. So build a program, call it All Pro Dad, put some simple talking points out in front of it, right? Give me a minute a day, an hour a month, a day, a year. Build it, allow it to come, and it can thrive in Chicago, or it can thrive in Oregon, or any place in between, because it meets a really important felt need in America. The rest of you are doing the same things, so I'm concurring with his message, but we don't need to overcomplicate this sports philanthropy thing. It's really just meeting needs in the community.
How do you do that, though?
We build a program, 1,400 chapters strong. Now we have hundreds of thousands of dads that come together every month with their children, have breakfast together, and learn how to become the dads that they're called to be, so they can take that into their own homes, but then they can begin to father their neighbor's children. The question is, who is my neighbor? Now you want to get into some biblical mandates, like what is it that we should do to bring truth and grace into our communities? That's how you do it. And then you build a groundswell, right, so that it becomes something that's very attractive. So you don't have to promote it at all. There's some element of what you were talking about, which is, hey, if we promote it well enough, if our talking points are good enough, then it'll be awesome and people will come. Well, we've seen a lot of failed programs in the world that have the best talking points, but if you meet a need, remember, right, meet a need, right, solve a problem, and then you put a system and an infrastructure in place that allows that to be guided by truth and life and hope, people will come, they'll participate, and then they'll take up that mantle of leadership, and we'll have a new chapter for All Pro Dad in Milwaukee soon. Because it's like, oh, that's a really good idea. Because that'll support our mama program and our women's sports initiatives and agendas.
And just to add, I mean, you can't have your message overtake your programming, right? I mean, people will see through that, and there's too many options in a cluttered space nowadays to be able to speak about something in such a high level, but then have nothing to support that on the ground.
Oh, sorry. Just speaking of meeting the need, and also what you were saying earlier about getting girls to play with boys and keeping them in the system. No, absolutely. You know, we historically, Canadian universities, we don't have a Title IX, but there was inequity in student athlete participation, more males than females. That the organization and the leadership prior to me had done a great job and really brought that even. But we continue to have a big gap with females in coaching. That a number of our female sports, or even a majority of our female sports, are coached by men, and our graduating student athletes, our female student athletes, may have had an interest in coaching, may have wanted to coach, were really struggling and have really struggled to get their foot in the door. And the big reason probably won't surprise anyone. You go apply for a job, and what's the first thing you're asked? What experience do you have? Well, I don't have any experience, I just graduated as a student athlete. If I don't get this job and I apply for the next one, I still don't have any experience, so you've got that chicken and egg. So, problem, right? And we can't solve it at a national level. We don't have the money to offer full-time assistant coaching jobs on behalf of our schools, or the money to pay those salaries. But what we've done is applied to the federal government for a little bit of funding on the understanding that we'll collect that money and we'll incentivize our schools to have a gender-based coaching apprenticeship program. Can't hire a full-time assistant necessarily, but you can get a few $1,000s that will go to professional development. You'll be responsible as a school to make sure that your mentor coaches are qualified mentors, they're certified, they understand the vision, and that female student athlete that has just graduated, maybe she's getting her graduate degree, maybe she has a job, a full-time job, but on the side, she's now got something on her resume. She's an apprentice coach at, University of British Columbia in her chosen sport, and now when she applies for that assistant job the next year, she's been to professional development, she's got a mentorship program, she's been an apprentice, she's got something on that resume that she didn't have before, and now ideally, in a couple of years, we've got more female assistant coaches than eventually head coaches, and that's really just identifying a gap and trying to fill it.
Yeah, so we have a couple minutes left, and then I want to open it up for questions. But I do want to touch on the solution, and so yeah, maybe you did strike a nerve a little bit, and so I love it because I think it's really going to generate conversation. So one of the things that I was thinking about when you mentioned creating programs, doing all these things, having opportunities for the all pro dads. One of the things that I think is also important to this conversation is not only looking at the solution and the need, because I think we then just provide something that may not necessarily be the need. So there's this infamous photo that I think everyone has probably seen of like people standing at the baseball field. And you have the different boxes, and there's the equality, and then there's the equity version. And so I think sometimes when we look at the solution and the need, we tend to look at, and that tends to be the result of looking at equality versus equity, where we have to look at the entire spectrum, which includes the system and the spaces that we work in and how we're creating access and how we're doing all these things. And so I'm saying that to say that when we're building our organizational agenda, it has to be this, and I'm trying to tie in all of the things that we talked about, but we really have to look at that informing data-driven model and that community-based data-driven model, because then we'll be able to not recreate the challenges and barriers that we probably even run into as organizational leaders. But we also want, we're serving young people, we're serving competitive athletes, we're all in various different sectors, but we want to allow those individuals to thrive beyond the organizations that we're in and that we're serving. So I think going back to internal and external communication, we have to be very strategic about what that looks like. When we talk about the organization direct service work, we have to be very strategic of how we're informing that work and how we're gathering information. And so this all goes a long way. So I just want to say that it's really incredible to see all the work that we're doing, but I also want to encourage all of us in our different spaces within the sports industry to collaborate together, because we all have a role in changing not only the programs that we're working in, the organizations we're working, but seeing beyond that. So thinking about education systems, health systems, juvenile justice systems, because there's I think someone mentioned that we work in juvenile justice or done some work there. So I just wanted to wrap up by saying that in sports philanthropy, it's well beyond just giving money, but it's about being a change maker and challenging systems, as well as providing the services and the access and the spaces necessary to thrive. So with that being said, I want to leave it for any final comments or questions or things from the panel, but then open it up for questions from all of you.
I'm going to say just one more thing. There is a women's sports industry. And to fill that women's sports industry, we have to get young girls and young women to work in that field. So as interns, creating those opportunities for them to get that experience. Like you said, you need that experience. So we create those opportunities for them to have that experience so they can go into the bigger avenue when it comes to sport and careers. So that's definitely a main piece. When you talk about girls, sports, and careers, that's the connections to get more girls and women active in any athletic or sports activity.
I think the key there is the collaboration piece. It's not a zero-sum game where it's if you don't work with me or you don't give me money that it's going somewhere else. You need to have an abundance model to be able to say that we can all work together, and that hey, I may not have the answer to the question you're looking for, but I know that if it is it's a women's sports issue, I'm going to come to you and say, how can we help solve this need with someone that I'm working with? And how do we bring more people into the fold there so that we can work together and collaborate? Because at the end of the day, I sat and spoke with someone 2 weeks ago who was like, there's a major issue of people that don't know that you can work in sports, and it's really a diversity issue. And then you take it even further, and then maybe it's a gender issue, and then how do you bridge the gap there and connect you with those people so that then you can also then teach to those individuals that are going through these classes. And I think that's the mindset, is how are you always trying to push it forward and collaborate and gather the people that you know are experts in their field and connect the dots.
Wonderful. Looks like we have some questions. Do we have a mic out there to pass around?
Yes.
Come to the floor.
Do I pan onto them?
Sure. Speaker of the House.
Hi, thank you. This is Jeff Madden with Your Second Act. And question to the group kind of as a whole. We have products and services always looking to connect and collaborate, as you said. But is there a forum or somewhere besides organizations like this that I could go to? Because the big challenge that we have is there's resources, as I heard everybody speak, that we have that we can help facilitate, and relationships that we've developed both from a corporate side that could reach across, and then of course elements that you have that would be beneficial to us. How do we bridge that gap?
I'm gonna add that, I can answer that, because what we do, I'm the owner of the Milwaukee Aces Pro Women's Basketball team in Milwaukee. I'm running the Women's Basketball Development Association. One of the things we do is teach women entrepreneurs how to be involved in sports. Because you see the NFL, NBA, you see all these, Honda and everything as these sponsors, but women entrepreneurs don't know how to connect. They don't connect that dot. So I teach them how to collaborate with a sports team so that you can get your vision, your mission, as well as your product out to the community, especially if you're dealing with girls and women. There's no way you have a beauty supply store and not connect with women's or girls' sports. It just doesn't make any sense. But if they don't know, how can you get them together? So that's the main piece, is just being able to connect with somebody and how your brand or your product can connect with that organization or with that team.
Right, Ben, I appreciate that and understand that. What I was asking is more, let me be more specific. That resource, I agree with you 100%, but it's where is that resource to go and do that? I understand philosophically how to, and have helped, and it's part of our mission as well, that we've done and impacted thousands. But is there a resource that I could go to and use to then connect with people like yourself or other, outside of a LinkedIn or something like that, that is just there in name that makes sense?
I can speak on behalf of, the organization that I'm, associated with Laureus, is that, one, I just want to say, just you speaking out and connecting and collaborating with people is just the most important and critical part. I don't think it can go far beyond without having relationship. Relationship building is probably the most critical part in terms of knowing what people need, seeing it that, is aligned with who you are and what you do. And I could just speak to what we have is we have a platform that we want to connect and create a collaborative experience for everyone to share out the resources, but also for us to empower by sharing resources and opportunities. So that's just one organization. I'm sure there are many others out there doing the same thing, and I think it's just all about conversation and being very present and visible about what it is that you do and build those relationships. I'd be happy to have a conversation with you personally after this, but I think that's what it takes to get to that point.
Hello, how's everyone doing? My name is Donnell Osley. I'm CEO of Portology Institute of Basketball, which is basically a study of the roots, fundamentals. We help communities, schools. I serve as a consultant. The concept is basically sports-based mental health with a faith-based approach. What I'd like to do right now is simply give Tiffany a round of applause. I think she's doing a phenomenal job. The reason I'm doing that is because we all are coaches. We all support a team, a collaborative effort, and I think we all see it's not easy to sit with minutes and try to approach something as large as she's approaching as it relates to the conversation, as well as the opportunity itself. So this is simply what I do as it relates to the children and individuals I work with. So that comment leads to my question. I'm one individual that probably has a hand in every fire possible as it relates to my city. It is the most difficult thing to try to do exactly what I see Tiffany doing. I do it, which means I sit on boards and panels and all these different places. But the one very important thing I heard Darrin say that really impressed me, that connects to my heart, how do you approach the giant with what it is that you know is so simple as a handshake, a smile, helping someone by simply knowing I can meet your need, and now let's go ahead and start working. That's a one-on-one. That's a one-on-one conversation. It's a one-on-one impact. And I believe the question that really helps me more than anything, how do we take that globally? Like, how do we now say this one-on-one with the principles I have has affected this one, but how do we now take that to 150,000 people? How do we take that to 30,000 people? Yes, my program has affected that many people. One city that I worked in is 19,000 people. I reached them by simply putting an ad in a park in red book, and now everyone can touch me. Only problem is I don't have the funding, nor do I have the visibility in a corporation that can tell me how to consistently affect those 19,000 people who can now partake in my services. So when I alliance myself as a employee of a company, they now want to utilize my entrepreneurial services to become something that works for their company, but it doesn't help me. So can someone address how do I change my platform from trying to be this multifaceted individual to just become the brand or the program to be a service provider with this type of help that I believe Roy has allowed us to have in this platform and service today.
So I'll throw it back at you though. What's that one thing that you want to be known for? I mean, if you touch 10 different things, are you an expert in all of those, or what is the single most critical thing that you do, or that if you could only pick one, what would it be?
Wonderful. Teaching. Basically, as a teacher, I'm a relationship builder. So meaning the trust that's given to me, and the reason my hand is in everything is because I stayed in one lane, which is sports philanthropy. But the problem is that it's a multifaceted industry, which means if you don't have integrity, you don't have faith, you don't have the ability to not barter certain services, it becomes a bit of a challenge when you're now approaching marketing. We only need the dollars, we only want the numbers, you know, the quantitative versus quality approach. So to answer your question, teaching, I teach.
Now, I was just gonna hopefully address it in the best way possible, and
Sure.
I'm gonna give a plug to my two colleagues who are also in the space, but you'll hear from one of them later, is that Laureus is a global foundation. So we use sport to address critical social justice issues and as a tool for youth development. Unpacking that is just what you're saying. It's a multifaceted beast that is very difficult to address, and one person can not do it alone. And so I want to just kind of give a shout to what the U.S. has focused on, and so we have a Sport for Good City model. And so within that model, it's multifaceted in the sense that we are very fortunate to have, a sponsor such as Mercedes-Benz and folks like this who are invested in our work to say that we are going to do grant making to really invest in the sports sector, because we believe that the power of sport can unite and change our communities in ways that little else does, because that's what Nelson Mandela, our founding patron, says. But then we look at it a lot deeper, and we look at the collective impact model, which is the most challenging space that we want to work in, because we recognize that organizations are limited in their capacity for impact. And I don't say that as in they are not able to do it. I say that in a way that they actually have a cap. They can only do so much in their organization, the direct service, the providing, all of that stuff. Now, I think it's our role, and what I would suggest for you, and also just, we can have a conversation after this, is that we have to look at the collaboration as the most critical tool that we have to make the change that we want, because you can't do it alone, but I think the empowerment of under individuals. So when I think about collective impact, and I have to use a specific example in New Orleans, if you're familiar with New Orleans, we have a very interesting education system. We have a very interesting Parks and Rec system, to where there's actually a really low percentage of people participating in sport and physical activity. We also know we have a high mass incarceration rate. And so how are those two things correlated? How is that creating a pipeline that is detrimental to our economy? And how do we have people recognize that? So there are different ways that you can plug and have conversations with large stakeholders. So we talked about this. We have the NCAA Final Four coming in. We know that there's a lack of female or women and girl participation in sport. How can we be strategic about leveraging that platform and building a partnership with them, understanding what it is that they're doing, their goals, and how do we align, the real impact systematically in our space. So you're not just gonna come to a city and do all these things and then leave. That's more detrimental than it is helpful. And so I'm saying this to say is there's an assessment that has to happen within the education system and understanding what their challenges are and how can sport actually change that model. And an example in New Orleans is that we're doing a landscape analysis and understanding what are the negative impacts of, like, what's happening in schools. There's low participation, there's high expulsion, suspension rates, there's low academic performance, but there's data and research that shows that sport and physical activity can change that trajectory. So how do you strategically work with partners that know, well, not partners, how do you work with an education system that's solely focused on changing test scores and all these things, and kids are burnt out? So I think there's also a level of talking to young people too, the people who are actually suffering the most, and giving them a voice and a way to change it, because I think they're probably most critical and most powerful in those spaces. So there's a way to strategically be intentional about how to change those models, and I'm just speaking from that one specific experience. There are many other ways, there are many other things we can talk about, because it's a very complex and multifaceted space. So that's my answer to that question. I hope that's okay.
And just a quick note,
Go out of the whole
is it Cordell?
Donnell.
Donnell. You know, before you impact the many, you first got to impact the few, right? You got to get better before you get bigger. And as you're in the middle of this, right, getting the soup of your sports philanthropy solution correct, like solving a problem and teaching at the center, once you get that, you get the clarity that my friend to the right begins to talk about, so you can communicate that. That will be the attraction. It's not about promotion, it's about attraction. And you can find a way to do this, and you're a compelling, charismatic communicator, so you're gonna get this. Just trust in that and get it right with the few first, and then find smart people that can help you along the way.
Hey everyone, Jared with City Champs. Just so you know what we do, we use martial arts and boxing to really develop character in youth. So I kind of have a question and a comment. Comment regarding women in sports. When it comes to combat sports or martial arts, boxing, it's just blowing my mind. I mean, women are coming up dominating. I mean, you look at wrestling. I mean, I mean, when we grew up, it didn't even exist. So I think that's awesome. There was a lot of talk today about aligning an organization. You know, in my mind, an organization is a group of people with a common belief and value, you know, that are passionate about doing something about it. So when it comes down to it, you know, everybody knows getting a good mission vision. Well, I've started a couple organizations over the years, and you know, everybody says start with the vision, you gotta get this right, and so on. But for City Champs, I've been challenged like I've never been challenged before to get it right. And if you actually go out and Google, let's say the top 25 mission vision statements, you look at the list, you know, of Amazon's, Tesla's, and they nail it, right? So, and it's different than it maybe was 15 years ago, where following the pattern of the youth attention spans. I mean, they're short to the point. So we're still working on updating it and getting it right, but how much do you guys advise and use your mission vision to guide and align with these groups to get everybody moving in the right direction? Is it something that is there, or is it something that's actually implemented and people understand and believe in? And that's, call it the guiding factor, which really, once you get that in place, you know, everything kind of flows from there. So is it something that you use strongly?
I would just say that we won't take on a project that doesn't align with our values and our mission or vision. I mean, not all money is good money, not all projects are good projects, and at the end of the day, you need to believe in the people you're working with, and you have to be true to your own star, right? So at the end of the day, if you can believe in it and tie it back and realize that the work you're doing, and we all work long hours, we're all making an impact, and so you have to believe in that mission and truly live that both at work and at home.
I changed my mission statement twice, you know, because when you first get started, you're all gung-ho, this is my mission, then you realize, I need to change this, because this is not who we really are.
You figure it out in the beginning,
Yeah,
just when you start
yeah,
something
and
new.
it's okay. It's okay. That's how longevity starts, right? That's how it stays. So just, you know, stick with what you know. If you feel this is not right and you see you need to tweak it a little bit, you do that. Because this is your organization, your passion.
And I guess to clarify is we're doing exactly that right now. We realized, hey, what we started with, now we're starting to figure out who we really are, how it works, and making sure that aligns. But the difference of, again, doing this for 15 years, the difference of what I had in my head of how to get it right versus really nailing it. And once you really nail that mission and vision, that people clearly see it and they're just like, yeah, that's it, let's move. But the effort that it takes to accomplish that is well beyond what I ever had in my head, and the amount of time and collaboration needed is, but once you get it right, it's that important.
Remember though that Amazon didn't start out the way they are, right? Yeah. None of these Facebook isn't what it actually was founded as. So, I mean, things need to evolve. The idea is that you're trying to always refine it so that it is true to yourself. But the examples you gave, I mean, you couldn't have envisioned that they Amazon would be worth $1 trillion, right? And that they have bookstores and grocery stores. That wasn't their intention.
And we're not talking about the evolution, it's more of, is it used? Sorry.
So I just wanted to say, I think this conversation.
Two more
can-
questions,
Okay.
last 2 questions.
Okay, never mind, Roy's got it covered.
Before we jump here, because this is, don't overcomplicate this. Do the triple why that makes them cry. If you can answer, right, I do inner city martial arts because it makes kids better. Tell me why. Answer the why, and then answer the why. And if it happens to lead to some strong emotion, fear, right? How do we avoid crime in the streets, right? Makes them cry because the kids learn how to belong and believe in themselves, whatever those things are. When you can get to that emotive thing, that's what motivates. I assume you're asking about community stakeholders. How do I motivate my donors? How to motivate the mayor to believe in what we're doing and give me the zoning that I need so that you can align the resources. So I just think of if you can answer why 3 times about why it is you're doing it, generally you'll get there. And don't be worried about bringing in some high-priced consultant. I'm sure there are a few in the room here today that can help you with that if you've got an extra, a few $1,000s. But I think just answer the why question and keep going deeper and deeper.
And I would just add, to me, I don't think you can get these perfect. And I'm sure if you ask the people at Facebook and Amazon, they will face a lot of forks in the road where they would like to go back to their vision, mission, values and think it'll just be the answer. There's always going to be things where it can be interpreted 2 different ways, or both choices kind of fit, and you're going to have to make a gut call, and that's why you lead an organization. It depends in part on the complexity of the stakeholders that you're checking with. We oversee 56 universities. Some of them are huge, some of them are tiny. Some of them field 21 teams, some of them field 4. They do not feel the same way about everything, and we have 1 vision, mission, values. Of our 5 values, 1 of them is excellence, and 1 of them is competitive balance. Those 2 things can directly conflict constantly, because if we are just about excellence, then we shouldn't have a cap on scholarship values, or we shouldn't have a cap on practice hours. You should be allowed to go as much as you want. But if we want to be able to have 56 universities be able to compete and have balance, we need those caps, otherwise the rich schools are going to win and the poor schools are going to lose. So they conflict all the time, and yet they are 2 of our 5 core values. That doesn't mean we got it wrong, it means it's hard. If it was easy, everyone would do it. So I don't think you need to be perfect. I think you need to be listening, consulting, getting it as good as you can, and then to the points that were made earlier, when you identify ways it can be better, change it, because you're not married to it. You can keep getting it better every couple of years.
All right, this is our last question.
Thank you for working me in. My name is Doug Garner. I'm with the University of Texas at Arlington. I'm the head wheelchair basketball coach for our intercollegiate programs and adapted sports coordinator. So my question is, and maybe for future panelists for the day to keep in mind, or you'll see me again, what can we do to be at the table with the decision makers? And a little background, we train Paralympians, we recruit from around the world, just signed a Canadian girl who's on the national team. So we partner with the Dallas Wings and do an all-girls wheelchair basketball camp. I think that's really important. In fact, we started our girls program with some money from our men's budget because we didn't have a girls program. And as it grew, the university realized that they had kind of fallen into some Title IX issues, and now we have a budget for our women's team. So we have scholarships, but it's all at a different level from the traditional athletic programs. What can we do to be at the table to be considered in the same conversations as athletes? We had a homecoming parade. They said, here's our moving Mavs. And then they said, here's our UTA athletes. So what's the next step on a micro level for us? Because I know if we can break that barrier, that can change all these programs.
Wow, that sounds like women's sports. Think about it. Right?
Yeah, 50 years ago.
Right.
So
exactly. How you do that, you just keep moving forward and be at the table. It's not about how to get there, you're already at the table. You got tons of people already listening to you now.
We are. Our president trots out our Paralympians for our donors and our fundraisers, and yet that doesn't translate into equal support for adapted athletes.
I'm gonna
Thank you for everybody for panel 1. Great job.
Okay.
We're going to have some more time at the end of the day for generalized questions and for follow-up on the conversations. There's obviously overlap in many of the panels. You can't deal with any of these issues in isolation. So I want to thank panel one for doing a great job and getting us off to a good start.